Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
Boom! The ground shakes. Fire rains from the sky. Fear fills every heart. Life changes in a second. This was World War II. Imagine a world turned upside down. From 1939 to 1945, the planet was taken by World War II, the most horrible conflict history has ever seen. It wasn't just battles between soldiers. It was a total war. For everyone, everywhere. Think about it. Cities became targets. Civilians were in danger, and entire countries put all their energy into fighting. This war wasn't limited to one place. It went across continents and oceans, from Europe to Asia, from the cold Atlantic to the islands of the Pacific. Millions of people, soldiers and ordinary people, lost their lives. The numbers are impossible to understand, but they show real people, real families, real losses. World War II was a time of incredible terror, but also of bravery and hope. It was a fight between good and evil, where heroes were ordinary people. The choices made during this time still shape our world today. Understanding World War II isn't just about dates and battles. It's about understanding ourselves and the world we live in now, a world still living in the shadow of this huge and terrible war. Let's explore this story and discover why it continues to matter so much. Chapter 1. War Comes. Before World War II started, the world was not a peaceful place. Many problems were still around after the last big war, World War I. That war, which ended in 1918, was supposed to be the war to end all wars. But it didn't work out that way. Instead of peace, the end of World War I left many countries unhappy and even angry. One of the biggest problems was the peace agreement itself, called the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty was made by the countries that won World War I, countries like Britain, France, and the United States. They wanted the countries that lost, especially Germany, to pay for the damage of the war. Germany was made to feel very bad and weak. They lost land, they had to reduce their army, and they had to pay a lot of money, called reparations. Germans felt this was unfair and that they were being punished too much. This made many Germans very angry, and they wanted revenge. The book says Germany was humiliated and broke, and started nursing a big-time grudge. It wasn't just Germany that was unhappy. The book also mentions Italy, one of the countries that won World War I, felt cheated. They didn't get as much land as they wanted. France was worried that Germany would become strong again and attack them again. Even the United States, who was far away across the ocean, just wanted to stay out of Europe's problem. The book calls this the uneasy peace after World War I. On top of these political problems, there were also big money problems. The whole world went through a very hard time called the Great Depression. In 1929, the stock market in America crashed, and soon after, economies everywhere became very weak. People lost their jobs, businesses closed, and life became difficult for many. The book explains that collapsing economies were a big factor. When times are hard, people look for strong leaders to solve problems. In some countries, especially in Germany and Italy, this led to the rise of dictators. These were leaders who promised to make their countries strong and powerful again. They said they could bring order and fix the economy. In Italy, Benito Mussolini became the dictator. He started a political idea called fascism. Fascism is about making the country very important and strong. Individual people are not as important as the nation. Fascists like Mussolini believed that war was a good thing and that it showed how great a country was. The book says fascism is a political ideology in which the state is exalted above all else. In Germany, Adolf Hitler became the dictator. He started Nazism, which was a type of fascism but with even more dangerous ideas. Hitler and the Nazis believed in the idea of a master race, the Aryan race, and that Germans were part of this special race. They thought other races, especially Jewish people, were inferior and bad. Hitler blamed Jewish people for all of Germany's problems and wanted to get rid of them. The book explains that Nazism is fascism, with a significant difference: the race issue. These dictators, Hitler and Mussolini, wanted to make their countries bigger and more powerful. They started to take aggressive actions, meaning they started to use force and threats to get what they wanted. They built up their armies and started making demands on other countries. Other countries, like Britain and France, were afraid of another big war after World War I. They tried to avoid conflict by giving in to some of the demands of Hitler and Mussolini. This policy was called appeasement. They hoped that if they gave them what they wanted, Hitler and Mussolini would be happy and peaceful. The book describes Britain and France as having a fear of another war and being willing to do just about anything to avoid it. But appeasement didn't work. Instead of making the dictators peaceful, it made them bolder and more confident. They saw that Britain and France were afraid to fight, and they became even more aggressive. The tension in Europe was growing, and many people could feel that war was coming closer. The world was like a pot of water about to boil over. It was only a matter of time before the war would come. Chapter 2. Hitler attacks Poland. The year is 1939. People in Europe are still worried. They remember the last big war, World War I. It was very bad, and nobody wanted another war. But in Germany, a man called Adolf Hitler was in charge. Hitler was the leader of the Nazi Party. He was angry after World War I. He thought Germany was treated unfairly. He wanted Germany to be strong again, and he wanted more land for Germany. Hitler started to make Germany's army bigger and stronger. Other countries like Britain and France watched. They hoped Hitler would stop. They tried to talk to him, to make peace. But Hitler did not want peace. He wanted to take land and show Germany was powerful. On the 1st of September, 1939, early in the morning, everything changed. Germany attacked Poland. This was the start of World War II. It was a day that people would never forget. The German army was very big and very strong. They had many soldiers, and they had new weapons like tanks. Germany used a new way to fight, called Blitzkrieg. This is a German word that means lightning war. It was about attacking very fast, like lightning. The German army attacked Poland from different directions. Imagine Poland on a map. Germany attacked from the west, from the south, and from the north. It was like three big arms closing in on Poland. The German army had tanks and soldiers in trucks that moved very fast. They also had a powerful air force called the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe was very important in the Blitzkrieg. They bombed Poland from the sky. They attacked Polish planes on the ground. They bombed roads and railways so it was hard for Polish soldiers to move and get supplies. The Polish army was not as strong as the German army, but the Polish soldiers were very brave. They wanted to protect their country. They fought hard against the German attack. They used guns and tanks to stop the Germans. But the German army was too strong and too fast. The German army used tanks to break through the Polish lines. They moved very quickly into Poland. The German tanks went around the Polish soldiers like they were trapping them. The German soldiers and trucks followed behind the tanks. From the sky, German planes bombed the Polish army all the time. After a few weeks of fighting, Poland was in big trouble. The German army was taking more and more land. Then, on the 17th of September, another army came into Poland from the east. This was the army of the Soviet Union, a big country next to Poland. The Soviet Union also attacked Poland. This was a surprise for Poland. Poland now had enemies on two sides. The Polish government knew they could not win. They had to leave Poland and go to another country to try and help from there. The Polish soldiers kept fighting, but it was very hard. The German army moved closer and closer to Warsaw, the capital city of Poland. Warsaw was a big city, and the Polish people tried to defend it. But on the 27th of September, Warsaw fell to the Germans. By the 5th of October, the fighting in Poland was over. Poland was defeated. Germany and the Soviet Union took control of Poland. The Blitzkrieg of Germany had worked very well. It was a fast and terrible way to fight a war. World War II had started with Hitler's attack on Poland. It was a very sad time for Poland and a very scary time for the rest of the world. People knew that this was not going to be a small war. This was going to be a big, long, and very dangerous war. Chapter 3. France falls down. After Germany attacked Poland, and then other countries like Norway and Denmark, everyone in Europe was very worried. We learned in the last chapter that Britain was strong and ready to fight back against Hitler. But what about France? France was a big country, and many people thought they had a strong army too. France and Britain were allies. When Germany attacked Poland, France also declared war on Germany. But after this, something strange happened. Nothing much seemed to happen. For many months, there was no big fighting in Western Europe. People called this time the phony war, or the sit-down war. It was like everyone was waiting, but not really fighting. France had built a very strong wall on its border with Germany. This wall was called the Maginot Line. It was made of many forts, underground tunnels, and guns. The French thought this wall would protect them from any German attack. They felt safe behind this wall. They believed Germany could not get through, but Hitler had other plans. He did not want to attack the Maginot Line directly. He knew it was too strong. Instead, he planned a surprise attack. Just like in Poland, he would use his new way of fighting. Blitzkrieg. Lightning War. On a day in May 1940, Germany attacked again. But this time, they did not attack the Maginot Line. They went around it. German tanks and soldiers moved very fast through countries near France, Holland, and Belgium. These countries were neutral, meaning they did not want to be in the war. But Germany did not care. They invaded anyway. The German army was very strong and very fast. They used tanks and airplanes together in a way no one had seen before. It was like a storm. Holland and Belgium could not stop them. They were small countries, and the German army was too powerful. These countries fell to Germany very quickly. Then, the German army came to France from the north, going through Belgium and the Ardennes Forest. The Ardennes Forest was a hilly and woody area. The French thought it was impossible for tanks to go through this forest. They were wrong. German tanks and soldiers surprised everyone by coming through the Ardennes. It was a big shock. The French army was not ready for this kind of attack. The German army was faster and better organized. French soldiers fought bravely, but they were often confused and did not know what to do. German airplanes bombed French cities and armies. It was chaos. Very quickly, the German army moved deep into France. They moved so fast that they cut off many British and French soldiers who were in Belgium. These soldiers were now trapped near the coast, near a French town called Dunkirk. Many British soldiers and some French soldiers were able to escape from Dunkirk. Many boats, even small boats from England, came to Dunkirk to rescue the soldiers from the beaches. It was a famous rescue, but it was also a sign that things were very bad. The British soldiers had to leave behind their guns, trucks, and tanks. They had escaped, but France was still in danger. The German army continued to move south into France. Paris, the capital of France, was in danger. The French government knew they could not win. The French army was losing badly. Many French people were scared and wanted the war to stop. So, in June 1940, France surrendered to Germany. It was a terrible shock for the world. France was a big and proud country. Now it was defeated by Germany in just a few weeks. It was much faster than anyone expected. France was now under German control. The north of France was occupied by German soldiers. In the south, there was a new French government, but it had to listen to Germany. France, a great power, had fallen down. The fall of France was a big victory for Hitler and Germany. Now, Germany controlled most of Europe. Only Britain was still fighting against Hitler. The world watched, scared and uncertain, to see what would happen next. Would Britain also fall? The future looked very dark. Chapter 4. Britain Stands Strong. After France fell to Germany, many people thought it was the end. Germany was winning. They were strong and fast. They had taken over many countries in Europe. Now, only one country stood against them in the West: Britain. Britain was an island. The sea around it was like a wall. But Germany was still very dangerous. Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany, wanted to defeat Britain too. He knew if Britain gave up, he could control almost all of Europe. The situation for Britain was very bad. Their army had escaped from France, but they left behind many weapons and trucks. They were alone, facing a powerful enemy. Many people in Britain were scared. Could they really fight Germany alone? But Britain had something very important: a strong leader. His name was Winston Churchill. He became the Prime Minister of Britain when things were at their worst. Churchill was a brave man. He was a great speaker. He told the British people that they would never give up. He said they would fight Germany everywhere, on land, on sea, and in the air. Churchill's words gave people hope. He said, "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." People listened to him. They believed him. They decided to stand strong. Hitler knew he had to defeat Britain. He needed to control the skies above Britain first. He sent his air force, the Luftwaffe, to attack Britain. This was the start of the Battle of Britain. It was a fight in the sky. The German planes came in big numbers. They wanted to destroy British airfields. If they could destroy the airfields, British planes could not fly. Then, Germany could attack Britain easily. But Britain had its own air force, the RAF, the Royal Air Force. British pilots were brave and skilled. They flew planes like the Hurricane and Spitfire. These planes were fast and good at fighting. The Battle of Britain was a hard fight. German planes bombed British cities. They bombed London, the capital city, for many nights. People were scared, but they did not break. They hid in underground train stations during the bombing. They helped each other. They showed great courage. This time of bombing was called the Blitz. The British pilots fought back hard. They shot down many German planes. The RAF used a new invention called radar. Radar helped them to see German planes coming from far away. This gave them time to get ready and attack. The Battle of Britain went on for months. Many pilots on both sides died. But in the end, Britain won. The Luftwaffe could not defeat the RAF. Germany could not control the skies over Britain. Hitler's plan to invade Britain had to stop. This was a very important victory for Britain and the Allies. It was the first time Hitler had failed to take over a country. It showed the world that Germany was not unbeatable. Britain, standing alone, had stopped Hitler. The Battle of Britain was a turning point. It gave hope to people in countries taken over by Germany. It showed that it was possible to fight back and win. Britain's strength and Winston Churchill's leadership became a symbol of resistance against tyranny. Even though the war was far from over, Britain's stand gave the world courage to keep fighting for freedom. Even though bombs fell and life was hard, Britain stood strong. They showed the world what it meant to never give up. This bravery would be important in the long and difficult years of World War II that were still to come. Chapter 5. War Gets Bigger. After Germany took over so many countries in Europe, some people thought the war might stop. Maybe Hitler was happy now? But the war was not finished. It was about to get much, much bigger. Even though Germany had fought and defeated France, there was still one big country in Europe that Hitler wanted. This country was the Soviet Union, also known as Russia. The Soviet Union was a very large country in the east of Europe, and it was ruled by a very different kind of government called communist, under a leader named Joseph Stalin. Hitler did not like communism at all. He thought it was bad for the world. But that was not the only reason he wanted to attack the Soviet Union. Hitler had a plan. He wanted more living space for German people. He believed that Germany should be bigger and stronger. And he looked to the east, to the lands of the Soviet Union. He thought these lands were rich and good, and he wanted them for Germany. He also thought that people in the Soviet Union were inferior and could be ruled by Germans. This was a terrible and wrong idea, but Hitler believed it. Many people, even some of Hitler's own generals, thought attacking the Soviet Union was a bad idea. They remembered that Russia was huge and had a very big army. They also knew that Russia could be very cold in the winter, and it would be hard to fight there. But Hitler was sure he was right. He thought the Soviet Union was weak and that the German army was strong enough to defeat them quickly. He was very wrong about this. On the 22nd of June, 1941, Germany started a massive attack on the Soviet Union. This attack was called Operation Barbarossa. It was a surprise attack. Early in the morning, German soldiers crossed the border into the Soviet Union. It was a huge attack with millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, and many planes. The German army was very strong and well trained at this time. They used their blitzkrieg tactics again, fast attacks with tanks and planes. At first, the German army moved very quickly into the Soviet Union. They took over large areas of land and captured many Soviet soldiers. It looked like Hitler might be right, and the Soviet Union would be defeated quickly. But the Soviet Union was not as weak as Hitler thought. The Soviet people were very surprised by the German attack, but they started to fight back very hard. Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, told his people that they had to fight to protect their country. He called it the Great Patriotic War. The war in the Soviet Union became incredibly brutal and terrible. It was a fight for life and death. The German soldiers were told to be very cruel to the Soviet people. Millions of people, both soldiers and civilians, died in this war. It was a war of huge battles and terrible suffering. Something very important happened when Hitler attacked the Soviet Union. Before, the Soviet Union was not on the side of Britain and France. They had even signed a deal with Germany not to attack each other. But now, because Germany attacked them, the Soviet Union joined the fight against Germany. This was a big change. Suddenly, the war against Germany had become much bigger. Now, Germany was fighting on two very big fronts. In the west against Britain and America, and in the east against the Soviet Union. These three big countries, Britain, America, and the Soviet Union, became allies. They were called the Allies. They were now working together to defeat Germany and the other countries on the German side, called the Axis. The war was no longer just in Western Europe. It was now spreading across the whole continent of Europe, and it was becoming a truly world war. The fight between Hitler and Stalin in the Soviet Union was one of the biggest and most important parts of World War II. It would change everything. Chapter 6. America enters. Sunday, the 7th of December, 1941. It was a normal morning in Hawaii. People were relaxing, getting ready for church, or just starting their day. Suddenly, the sky filled with airplanes. But these were not American planes. They had a red circle on them, the symbol of Japan. Bombs. Explosions shook the ground. The airplanes were attacking Pearl Harbor, the big American naval base in Hawaii. It was a surprise attack. Nobody in America expected it. Pearl Harbor was very important for the American Navy in the Pacific Ocean. Many ships were there, lined up in the harbor. The Japanese planes dropped bombs and fired guns. They wanted to destroy the American ships and airplanes, so America could not fight back quickly. It was a terrible attack. Many American sailors and soldiers were killed. Ships were sunk. Airplanes on the ground were destroyed. It was a day of shock and sadness for America. Why did Japan attack Pearl Harbor? Japan wanted to be the most powerful country in Asia. They were already fighting in China and wanted to take control of more countries in Asia. The United States did not like this. America wanted Japan to stop taking over other countries. America stopped selling oil and metal to Japan. Japan needed these things for their factories and army. Japan's leaders thought that if they could destroy the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, America would not be able to stop them in Asia. They thought they could quickly take control of Asia before America could recover. They hoped America would then just want peace. They were wrong. When news of the attack reached America, people were angry and sad, but also determined. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the leader of America, spoke to the country. He said, "The 7th of December, 1941, was a date which will live in infamy." He meant it was a day that would always be remembered as a terrible day, a day of shame for Japan. President Roosevelt asked the American Congress to declare war on Japan. Congress agreed. America was now officially in World War II. Soon after, something else happened that made the war even bigger. Germany, led by Hitler, declared war on the United States. Italy, which was also fighting with Germany and Japan, they were called the Axis powers, also declared war on America. Now, America was fighting in two big wars at the same time. In Europe, they would fight against Germany and Italy. In Asia and the Pacific, they would fight against Japan. It was a huge challenge for America. After Pearl Harbor, Japan had more victories in Asia. They took over places like the Philippines, Singapore, and Burma. It seemed like Japan was very strong and unstoppable. But the attack on Pearl Harbor had changed everything. Before Pearl Harbor, America was on the side, watching the war from far away. Now, America was in the middle of the fight. The war was no longer just in Europe or just in Asia. It was now truly a world war. And America, with its strong factories and many people, was ready to fight and help the Allies win. The world had changed again. Chapter 7. Big Fights Start. After Germany took over much of Europe, the war became much bigger. It wasn't just about countries falling quickly anymore. Now, huge battles started to happen. These fights were not easy. They were long, hard, and changed the direction of the war. One of the biggest fights was in a city in Russia called Stalingrad. Germany wanted to take this city from the Soviet Union, Russia. Stalingrad was important because it was on a big river, the Volga. Hitler, the leader of Germany, thought if he took Stalingrad, it would hurt the Soviet Union a lot. In 1942, German soldiers went to Stalingrad. The Soviet soldiers were there to stop them. What happened next was terrible. Fighting in Stalingrad was not like fighting in fields or forests. It was fighting in the city itself. Soldiers fought for every street, every building, even every room. It was very close and very dangerous. The German army was very strong, but the Soviet soldiers were brave and determined. They did not want to lose Stalingrad. They fought house by house. People say the fighting was so loud and so close, you could hear it all the time, day and night. The winter came. It was a very cold Russian winter. The German soldiers were not ready for the cold. They did not have warm clothes. They were hungry and tired. The Soviet army, however, was ready for the winter. They knew how to fight in the snow and ice. Then, something amazing happened. The Soviet army made a big attack around Stalingrad. They surrounded the German army in the city. The German soldiers were trapped. Hitler told them not to give up, but they had no food, no help, and the winter was killing them. In 1943, the German army in Stalingrad had to surrender. This was a huge win for the Soviet Union and a big defeat for Germany. Many people think the Battle of Stalingrad was the turning point of the war in Europe. After Stalingrad, Germany started to lose ground in the east. At the same time as the fighting in Stalingrad, Big battles were happening in North Africa. This is in the desert part of Africa. Germany and Italy were fighting against Britain and America here. The German army in North Africa was led by a clever general named Rommel. He was called the Desert Fox because he was very good at fighting in the desert. Rommel and his army were fighting against the British army in a place called El Alamein in Egypt. The British army was now led by a new general named Montgomery. Montgomery was very careful and planned his attack very well. In 1942, Montgomery attacked Rommel's army at El Alamein. It was a big battle with tanks and soldiers fighting in the hot desert sun. After many days of fighting, the British army defeated Rommel and the German army. This was another turning point. After El Alamein, the German army started to lose ground in Africa. While these land battles were changing the war, something important was also happening at sea. In the Pacific Ocean, America was fighting Japan. Japan had attacked America at Pearl Harbor. Remember Chapter 6. Now, America was fighting back. A very important sea battle happened near a small island called Midway. This was the Battle of Midway in 1942. The battle was mostly fought in the air with planes from ships called aircraft carriers. The American Navy and the Japanese Navy fought hard. In the Battle of Midway, the American Navy defeated the Japanese Navy. This was a very important win for America. Many people think the Battle of Midway was the turning point of the war in the Pacific. After Midway, Japan started to lose power in the Pacific. So by 1943, big fights had started all over the world. Stalingrad in Russia, El Alamein in Africa, and Midway in the Pacific. These battles were hard and cost many lives. But they showed that the war was changing. Germany and Japan were not winning anymore. The tide was turning, and the Allies, countries fighting against Germany and Japan, were starting to get stronger. The big fights had begun, and the world waited to see what would happen next. Chapter 8. War in Islands. By 1944, the war in the Pacific had changed. Japan had won many battles at the start. But now, America was getting stronger. American ships, planes, and soldiers were ready to fight back. The American plan was to get closer to Japan. To do this, they needed to take islands in the Pacific Ocean. These islands were small and far away, but Japan had built strong bases on them. The Japanese army was ready to fight for every island. They believed it was their duty to die for their emperor and their country. They did not want to give up any land. The American strategy was called island hopping. Imagine stepping stones across a river. The Americans would not attack every island Japan controlled. Instead, they would hop over some strong islands and attack important ones. These important islands were the ones they could use to build airfields and bases. From these bases, they could attack Japan itself. Two very important island groups became the focus of the fighting: Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These islands were closer to Japan than any others America had taken. Taking them would be very hard, but very important. Iwo Jima was a tiny island. You could walk across it in a few hours. But it was made of rock and volcano ash. The Japanese made it into a fortress. They built tunnels and bunkers underground. They put guns everywhere. They were ready to fight until the last soldier. The American Marines had to take Iwo Jima. They needed it as a place for fighter planes to help bombers attack Japan. The battle for Iwo Jima was one of the toughest of the war. First, American ships and planes bombed the island for days. They wanted to destroy the Japanese defenses. But the Japanese were hidden deep underground. When the Marines landed on the beach, they faced heavy fire. The sand was soft and black from the volcano. It was hard to move quickly. The Japanese fought from caves and tunnels. It was very difficult to attack them. Marines had to fight for every meter of land. They used flamethrowers and grenades to clear out the Japanese positions. The fighting was close and very dangerous. Many soldiers died on both sides. One famous moment happened on Iwo Jima. American Marines climbed to the top of Mount Suribachi, a volcano on the island. They raised an American flag there. A photographer took a picture of this moment. This picture became very famous. It showed the courage and strength of the American soldiers. But even after the flag was raised, the battle was not over. The Japanese still fought hard for weeks. In the end, almost all the Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima died. The Americans won, but they lost many men too. Iwo Jima was a small island, but it cost a lot to take. Okinawa was a much bigger island than Iwo Jima. It was also closer to Japan. If America could take Okinawa, they could bomb Japan very easily. The Japanese knew this. They prepared Okinawa even more strongly than Iwo Jima. Okinawa was full of hills and caves. The Japanese built strong defenses in these hills. They planned to make the Americans pay a very high price for the island. They were ready to use new and terrible weapons. Kamikaze planes. Kamikaze planes were suicide planes. Japanese pilots would fly planes loaded with bombs directly into American ships. They did this because they knew Japan was losing the war. They believed that dying for their emperor in this way was the greatest honor. The battle for Okinawa was the biggest sea-land battle in the Pacific War. American soldiers and Marines landed on Okinawa on the 1st of April, 1945. They landed easily at first, but soon they met the Japanese defenses. The Japanese did not fight on the beaches. They waited in the hills. The fighting on Okinawa was very long and very bloody. The Japanese fought from caves and tunnels, just like on Iwo Jima. The Americans had to use everything they had: tanks, artillery, planes, and flamethrowers. It took months to push the Japanese back. The kamikaze attacks were very scary for the American Navy. Many ships were hit and damaged. Some ships were sunk. Thousands of American sailors died. In the end, the Americans won the battle for Okinawa. But it was very costly. Many American and Japanese soldiers died. Many civilians on Okinawa also died. The battles for Iwo Jima and Okinawa showed how hard it would be to invade Japan itself. The Japanese were ready to fight to the death. American leaders knew that invading Japan would mean many more deaths, maybe millions. These island battles were a terrible warning of what was still to come. Chapter 9. Germany is defeated. By the start of 1945, everyone knew the war in Europe was close to its end. But the fighting was still very hard. Germany was hurt, but it was not giving up easily. The Allied armies from the West and the Soviet armies from the East were pushing into Germany itself. In the West, the Allied soldiers from America, Britain, Canada, and other countries had crossed the big Rhine River. This river was like a strong wall that Germany thought would stop the Allies. But the Allies were too strong. They found a bridge that was still standing at a town called Remagen. American soldiers rushed across this bridge before the Germans could destroy it. This was a big moment. It meant the Allies were now inside Germany, on German land. Even though they were inside Germany, the fighting was not over. German soldiers fought hard to protect their country. But they were tired, and they didn't have enough weapons or fuel. The Allied planes controlled the sky. They bombed German roads, trains, and factories day and night. It was very difficult for Germany to move soldiers or get supplies to the front lines. Not long before, in December, Hitler had tried one last big attack. It was called the Battle of the Bulge. He wanted to surprise the Allies and push them back. For a short time, the German attack worked. The Allies were surprised. But the Allied soldiers were strong. They fought back very hard. The Battle of the Bulge was a big loss for Germany. They used up their last strong soldiers and tanks. After this battle, Germany was much weaker. While the Western Allies pushed into Germany from the west, the Soviet armies were getting closer from the east. They were moving very fast through Poland and into Germany. The Soviet soldiers were very angry. They had seen how much Germany had destroyed in their country. They were ready to fight and win. The Soviet armies reached the Oder River, which was very close to Berlin, the capital of Germany. Berlin was the most important city in Germany, and Hitler was there, in a bunker under the city. Everyone knew the final battle would be for Berlin. The bombing of Germany from the air was getting worse and worse. British and American planes dropped bombs on German cities all the time. They wanted to destroy German factories and make it hard for Germany to fight. Many German cities were in ruins. Many German people were killed or lost their homes. But even with all this bombing, the German people did not give up easily. In Berlin, Hitler was still giving orders, but they did not make sense anymore. He was living in a dream world, not seeing what was really happening. He ordered his soldiers to fight to the last man. But many German soldiers knew the war was lost. They were tired of fighting. They wanted the war to end. In late April, the Soviet armies started the final attack on Berlin. It was a terrible battle. The Soviet soldiers fought street by street, house by house. The German soldiers and even old men and young boys fought back, but they could not stop the Soviet advance. On the 30th of April, Adolf Hitler killed himself in his bunker in Berlin. He knew everything was finished. Germany had lost the war. After Hitler died, some German leaders tried to make a deal with the Western Allies. They wanted to surrender to America and Britain, but not to the Soviet Union. But the Allies said no. They wanted unconditional surrender. This meant Germany had to give up completely to everyone, with no deals. On May 7th, German leaders signed the papers of surrender to the Western Allies. On May 8th, they signed again to the Soviet Union. The war in Europe was finally over. People in Allied countries celebrated in the streets. It was called VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. But even with the celebrations, everyone knew that the world had changed forever because of the war. Millions of people were dead. Many countries were destroyed. The peace that came after the war was going to be a difficult one too. Chapter 10. Japan stops fighting. Germany was finished. The war in Europe was over, but the World War was not completely done. Japan was still fighting. Japan was far away in Asia and the Pacific Ocean. They were a strong enemy, and they did not want to give up. In 1945, America and its friends had to decide, how do we make Japan stop fighting? They knew that invading Japan would be very, very difficult. Japan is made of islands, and they would fight for every beach, every hill, every town. American leaders thought that if they invaded Japan, many soldiers, maybe 1 million, would die. Japanese people would die too, of course. It would be a terrible battle. So, America looked for another way. They had a new, secret weapon. It was called the atomic bomb. Scientists in America had been working for years to build this bomb. It was a bomb that used the power of atoms. It was much stronger than any other bomb before. President Truman of America had to make a big decision. Should he use this new bomb? He knew it would kill many people, maybe mostly civilians, people who were not soldiers. But he also thought it could end the war quickly and save even more lives in the long run, both American and Japanese. It was a very hard choice. Truman decided to use the bomb. On the 6th of August, 1945, an American plane called the Enola Gay flew over Japan. It dropped the atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. It was a sunny morning. Suddenly, there was a huge flash, brighter than the sun. Then came a terrible explosion. The city was destroyed. Everything was burned and broken. Thousands of people died instantly. Many more were badly hurt and would die later. The world had never seen anything like it. The Japanese government was shocked. But the army leaders still wanted to fight on. They thought America only had one bomb. 2 days later, something else happened. Russia, which was called the Soviet Union then, declared war on Japan. Russia had been fighting Germany, but now Germany was defeated. The leaders of America, Britain, and Russia had agreed that Russia would help fight Japan too. Russian soldiers attacked Japanese armies in China. This was another big blow for Japan. Then, on the 9th of August, just 3 days after Hiroshima, America dropped a second atomic bomb. This bomb fell on the city of Nagasaki. Again, there was terrible destruction and death. Now, even the army leaders in Japan knew they could not win. They had to stop fighting. The Emperor of Japan, who was like a god to the Japanese people, made a very important decision. He told his government to accept the terms of surrender from America and its friends. This was something very unusual. Japanese emperors did not usually speak about politics or war, but this was a special time. On the 14th of August, 1945, Japan said yes. They would stop fighting. People all over the world were happy and relieved. World War II, the biggest and most terrible war in history, was finally over. On the 2nd of September, 1945, on an American warship called the Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japanese leaders signed the paper of surrender. General MacArthur, the American commander, was there. Soldiers and leaders from many Allied countries were there too. It was a day of great importance. It was VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day. The war was over, but the world was changed forever. The atomic bomb showed how powerful weapons could be. People hoped that there would never be another world war. They hoped that the lessons of World War II would help build a better and more peaceful world. But the peace was uneasy. New problems and new dangers were already starting. Conclusion: a new world, an uneasy peace. World War II finally stopped in 1945. The guns went silent, but the world was changed forever. It was a war that took so much. Think about the numbers. Millions of people died. Soldiers and normal people, men, women, and children. In some countries, like the Soviet Union and China, so many people were lost, it's hard to even count them all. Cities were ruined, turned to dust and broken buildings. The war touched almost every country on Earth, from Europe to Asia, from the deserts of Africa to the islands of the Pacific Ocean. The war was over, and the good guys, the Allies, had won. They had fought against terrible ideas like Nazism and fascism. They fought for freedom and for a better world. But even with victory, peace was not easy. The world that came after the war was very different, and in many ways, it was an uneasy peace. New countries were made after the war. Some old empires, like the British and French empires, started to fall apart. People in colonies wanted to rule themselves. This was a big change. In Europe, the map was redrawn. Some countries became bigger, some smaller. But a big problem was the split in Europe. The Soviet Union, which was a communist country, controlled many countries in Eastern Europe. These countries were not free like the countries in Western Europe. An iron curtain, as Winston Churchill called it, came down across Europe, dividing it into two different worlds. This division led to new problems. The countries that were friends during the war, like the United States and the Soviet Union, became rivals. They started a new kind of war, called the Cold War. This was not a war with bombs and guns, not directly between them anyway, but a war of ideas and power. The world was now split into two sides, and people were still afraid of another big war. The war also changed technology. New inventions from the war, like planes and rockets, changed how people traveled and how future wars would be fought. And, of course, the most terrible invention of all, the atomic bomb, changed everything. Suddenly, humans had a weapon that could destroy whole cities in a second. A weapon that made everyone think about the future of the world with fear. World War II taught some very hard lessons. It showed the world the dangers of hate and prejudice. The terrible things the Nazis did to the Jews, the Holocaust, showed everyone how important it is to fight against racism and hate. It also showed the importance of working together. Countries that used to be enemies had to become friends to fight against a bigger enemy. This idea of working together led to the creation of the United Nations. People hoped the UN could help countries solve problems peacefully and stop another world war from happening. But as time passes, memories fade. People who lived through World War II are getting older, and soon they will not be here to tell their stories. It becomes easier to forget the lessons of the war. That's why it's important to remember. We need to remember the heroes and the villains. We need to remember the sadness and the victories. We need to remember the sacrifices people made to win freedom. World War II was a terrible time, but it also showed the best and worst of humanity. It showed great courage and terrible cruelty. It shaped the world we live in today in ways we still see every day. Understanding World War II is not just about learning history. It's about understanding ourselves and our world. It's about remembering the past to build a better future, a future where we can all live in peace, a peace that is not uneasy, but real and lasting. We must remember the past so we can work harder for peace in our time and for all time.
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.